I'm Crystal. Today we're going to make this super cute tiny house from paper with absolutely no dies, just a ruler, scissors, and glue. So let's do this project. Okay, so we've got a template, and that template is linked in the description box below, and I also have the measurements in the description box if you'd rather just go by the measurements rather than print. Now, copy paper is not going to work. You need cardstock or thin cardboard like a large cereal box. Plus ruler, scissors, and glue. If you use the cereal box, you want to put your markings on the printed side. And whatever cardstock you use, you want to put the markings on the inside when you fold it up. I'm doing it with the markings on the outside so you can see what I'm doing, but that does leave the outside of your project a little untidy. So I'm using a Sharpie so you can see what I'm doing, but obviously a pencil would work just fine. And I'm just marking off these measurements. That's 2 inches, 7 inches, and 9.5 on the first long side. And then on the other side, it's a 1/2 inch, and then 4 inches and 9 inches. Then along the bottom, I'm going to mark at 3 inches and 8 inches. Next, I'm going to mark my score lines. So at that 2 inch to 9 inch line, I'm going to mark a score line. And then between the 7 and the 4 inch measurements, I'm going to mark a score line. My initial measurements there were kind of sloppy, so I had to fix that. And then I'm going to turn the page and mark at the 3 inch mark, and I'm just putting a tick at the top to make sure that my lines at 3 and 8 are going to be straight up and down. So I'm marking my score line and my cut line at 3 inches, and then I'm marking a score line and a cut line at the 1/2 inch gutter. Once I've done that, I'm going to mark off on this right hand panel at the 9.5 mark, and then I'm going to find the midpoint of the house front. It's 5.5 inches from the left side of the page. I'm going to mark that at the top of that box and then at the top of the roof, and then I'm just going to put my ruler between those 2 points and mark my score line between those 2 points. You don't need to measure anything. And then from this 1/2 inch gutter at 7 inches, we also have got a point, and that point is going to go to this midpoint of our peaked roof. Don't need to measure, just mark the line. Then you need a tab at the top of the roof, and I didn't measure that either. I just moved out about 1/2 inch and drew a line. And that is pretty literally all there is to it. So now we're going to cut. So I'm cutting against all the red lines so that I can fold this up to make the house shape. And very straightforward, they're straight lines, nothing really special or fancy about it. And once I've got all those red lines cut and I've gotten rid of all that paper, I am going to shape my flaps a little bit just by cutting a little triangle off the edge of each flap. This is optional. I don't know that it really helped this particular project, but sometimes having that little triangular flap does make your stuff fold up a little bit better, so yeah, what the heck, I did it. And then after I've cut my little flaps on all these little spots, I'm going to score. Now I've got a scoring tool, and I'm going to use that, but if you don't, take a pencil or a pen and retract the lead or the ink and just use that. Put your ruler against the line, put your scoring tool, whatever you're using, and just score against all those dotted lines to make score marks. And this is necessary because we're using heavier weight cardstock or cardboard. Once you've marked all the score lines, just push those straight edges against the edge of a straight table and fold the paper. You'll get a perfect score mark that way. You don't need any kind of scoreboard or anything. I forgot to score that line. But once you've scored all this piece of the house, we need to make a second piece for the other side and the back. And I've sped this one up, so it's going to go by a little bit faster, but it's the same thing. We're going to mark the first side at 2, 7, 9.5. The second side at 1/2, 4, and 9. Then the bottom at 3 and 8. Then I'm going to mark my score lines at the top and bottom of the house. Then I'm going to mark off the side from the front. Mark my little cut lines for all the pieces. I'm going to mark the top of the peaked roof. I'm going to cut that off. Then I'm going to find the midpoint of the house, and I'm going to mark that. And then I'm just going to take my ruler between those points at the top of the house and draw the triangle for the top of the house, and then my flaps. And that's it. I mean, it's a very simple template, and the cutting is very straightforward again. Just going to cut along all those red lines to cut out the other half of the house and go from there. Now, I did scale this to take 2 entire 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, but you could put this on your copier and scale it down, or maybe I'll do that before I prepare the PDF download, to make it any size you want. This finished house ends up being 7.5 inches tall, 5 inches wide, and 3 inches deep, but you could scale it to a smaller percentage if you wanted to have a slightly smaller house. I thought this was a pretty good size to work with, and now I'm just going to attach at all the flaps. Glue is perfectly fine, but I am impatient, and so I'm going to use double-sided tape. If you use glue, you may need to pause between some of the steps to make sure that the flap is firmly adhered before you move on and start jiggling it to adhere someplace else. So you just have to line up the side against the front of the house best you can. This is why I left the lines on the outside for the demonstration. And then attach that flap, and then we're going to attach the other side to the back of the house. Here's my tape on the flap. Probably would have been more efficient to put all the tape at once, but I did not do that. And we attach that flap. And then I'm just going to reinforce those score lines with my folding tool. You can use your hands, or maybe you're just better at adhering than I am and your house was perfectly square to begin with. Next, I'm going to fold in the bottom, and I couldn't decide right at first, but I ended up folding in the short sides first and then closing the long sides on top of those. So I'm putting a little bit of tape on the inside of that longer flap on either side, and then I'm going to remove the non-stick cover on the tape and push those ends against the tape from the inside, so I get a nice firm seal. And then on the remaining open side, I'm going to put a little tape on the inside, and then again I'm going to push the flaps against that tape from the inside. There we go. Now we've basically got a house, and so now we're going to close the top. Now I completely sealed my house. It's not, you could leave one or the other side of the roof open if you wanted to put a gift inside or something. I just completely sealed the house up, so it's purely decorative, but you could attach one side of the roof and leave the other side open, or attach the second side of the roof using a little bit of Velcro tape if you wanted to put something inside. So I just put a little bit of tape on the 2 flaps on the side, expose that adhesive, push the roof down on top of those flaps, trying to get everything nice and square as I went. And then we're going to do the second side the same way, put a little tape on those 2 flaps. And we are almost done. Nice tight fit. And I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, permanently seal my house. So since I assembled this with all my marks on the outside, I did need to do a little bit of decoration. And so I coated my entire house with some paint and then put on some decorative details using scraps of paper. You could use a marker or whatever you want. But here's my finished project with a little paint and paper.